Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman. I'm a LinkedIn news editor focused on job searching and careers. So, welcome and thank you for joining us. I want to start, as always, by asking you to introduce yourself in the comments. I've seen so many of you already start doing that. I think we have Marvin from Houston, Alicia from Jamaica, we have Maureen from Paris, and Janelle from Texas. So, welcome to the stream. Keep introducing yourself, but tell us a little bit about you and your status as a job searcher. So, be sure to tell us a little bit about where you're looking for work, what you're looking for in your next position. And then once you start seeing people start introducing themselves, connect with each other. Maybe you see someone who's in your area, who is in the area you want to work in, who's in the industry you want to work in, or maybe in an industry that they want to move in. So make those connections. Networking is so important to your job search, and there's no better time to start than now. So make those connections now and they'll pay dividends later. Some of the best messages I get from people are when they respond to me after a show saying that they've started job search groups based on who they met in the comments of the show. And it's really fantastic and has been shown to actually help people with their job search and find work faster. So be sure you're doing that. And then obviously, your job search questions, please put them in the stream because we'll be getting to them in just a bit. We have a wonderful guest today, someone who you may know from your LinkedIn feed. She is an executive storyteller, a resume writer, a LinkedIn writer, and she is Virginia Franco. So welcome to the stream, Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm a huge fan of this show.
Well, I'm a huge fan of what you post on LinkedIn, so thank you for joining us. And I want to start off by talking a little bit about an area of expertise you have, since you focus a lot on resumes, about applicant tracking systems, because I know they're going to come up today. So I wanted to make sure that we have that discussion up front. And can you tell us what an applicant tracking system is?
Sure. An applicant tracking system, you see the term ATS all the time. It is a system that companies put in place to screen and organize applications and resumes that come in the door.
Great. And oh, yeah. Can you tell us a little bit of why companies use them? Because one thing I hear from job seekers is that, companies are lazy for using them and that, people should go through all the resumes they receive. So what's the purpose of an ATS?
So my understanding is that the original purpose was just to really help HR organizations organize and filter all of the resumes that they were getting. It was really more of an automated filing system. It then evolved, the capabilities evolved, and now again, it does serve the purpose of organizing, but it helps companies to score and elevate certain resumes to the tops of piles. It's really important to know that there are, I think 273 different applicant tracking software systems. Some are more advanced than others. So, when you hear about ATS rules, it's what you're trying to do is come up with best practices that encompass all of them. And I want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Cheryl Millick. She is truly the guru for ATS, and I have been known to reach out to her on occasion just to make sure that what I know is super current, because just like everything with technology, it continues to evolve.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit about when you're doing a resume or even a cover letter, what to keep in mind about applicant tracking systems, since they are so prevalent, especially at large employers?
Yeah. So the first thing I say, and you'll hear this from me over and over again, is if there is any way to bypass applying online as sort of your first point of entry, I recommend it, because your chances of getting that call for that phone screen are much greater when you have an internal champion on the other end that's looking for your resume, versus having to submit against hundreds of people you don't know, two people you don't know. But that being said, when you do apply it, there's a couple of common things and you need to be sure to remember. First and foremost, the majority of ATS cannot read anything in a header or a footer. So people that I see this all the time, where people put their names, their phone numbers, their emails in the header or the footer, and they can't get read. The other thing that people don't always know is that ATS can't read anything in a text box. which there's a lot of resume templates out there where you are, when you open up the page, there's little boxes and you're asked to put in the relevant information in those boxes. There's a decent chance that by using those templates, you might be hurting your chances of being read on many ATS systems because it simply can't read it. The best way to make sure that what you are putting on paper can be read by ATS is to convert it to a plain text document. And then and anything that is picked up by plain text can be picked up by ATS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, one thing that I always sort of recommend too is if you're choosing to apply online, make sure you read the instructions because I think a lot of people get tripped up because they're used to clicking buttons, so they say, oh, I'm going to upload my file and I'm going to hit the button and that's going to be the end of it. But a lot of people, I think, get tripped up by some of the questions that they're asked during the application process, and then oftentimes it'll say, hey, it's best if you upload this file format or that file format. So I always tell people, make sure that you're actually reading what you're clicking. I think that's always a good idea online.
ATS don't give you a second chance.
Exactly. And, I want to make sure that we also get to member questions. And we have so many people joining us. We have Tony from Atlanta, Andrea from Florida, Bonnie from New Jersey, Joe from Oregon, Trisha from Pennsylvania. And I know we have a lot more people out there. So please get your questions into the stream and we'll be answering them in just a bit. And one of the things that I wanted to get to up front is some questions that came in a bit earlier before the show. And one of them is, this comes up a lot, and I think there are some names for this in the resume world, but should you always list jobs chronologically, or is there ever a time when you would maybe mix things up to cater to the job you're applying for?
That's a great question. And the answer is with everything in resumes is it depends. Strict functional resumes where you don't organize anything by dates or any chronology don't tend to do very well. Strict functional resumes are where you sort of say, here are my customer service skills, here are my customer service experiences, here are my this, here are my that, and you're grouping it that way. What I always tell clients is if your relevant experience based on what you're targeting is recent or maybe one role ago, meaning it's going to get good page one coverage, then it's okay to stick with a strictly chronological format. However, if the experience that you need to reference is much older than that, meaning it's probably going to be on page two, a technique that I often use is a hybrid chronological functional where I will group certain kinds of jobs and then I will list them in chronological order from there. So if you're targeting a sales role and you haven't been in sales in 5 years, it would be maybe on page 2. You might want to list your sales jobs up at the top and then group your other roles secondarily.
Got it. And we have, and also before I forget, that question was from Shinton. So thanks for sending the question in, Shinton. And we have, I think, almost a follow-up question from Fred in the comments, which is, what is the best way to present skills on a resume? I know, when I was in, learning how to write a resume many years ago, it was always like, oh, just throw them in at the bottom. But it's much more nuanced than that.
It is. The quickest way to get as many sort of skills as possible listed, and it makes for really good scannable reading, is to have a skills section. Where I put that is just above the experience section. So the sections of the resume, you start with a headline, and then you have a summary section right below that. Then I will have the skills, and then I'll go into the experience. So that is what's great about having that section, is that you can customize it based on the roles that you're targeting. And one of the things I love about LinkedIn's jobs is that a lot of postings actually list the skills right there that they're looking for. So make sure that you put them in there. And then additionally, you want to make sure that any skills you list in the resume, that you reference them in some fashion in your accomplishment statements when you're describing your experience.
Got it. And we have 2 follow-up questions to the ATS explanation. So the first one is from Pragya, who asks, is Word or PDF the preferred format, or is that a situation where you should read the instructions?
Read the instructions. It really depends. in the olden days, meaning like 5 years ago, Word was exclusive, but now ATS are getting more advanced and they can read PDF.
Got it.
So
And then,
they say.
oh yeah. And then we have a question from Valerie, and you mentioned sort of plain text format. What about common text that you might see, which is, Times New Roman or something like that? Are those sort of good choices too?
In the olden days, you used to try to stick with one or two fonts. That is really no longer the case with the majority of ATS. So as long as it's a font that's common to Microsoft Word, you're in good shape. I would stay away from Google fonts though, because my understanding is that the many ATS aren't really skilled in picking those up very well yet, or they might format them wonky when it goes through the system.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I know a lot of people who love working in Google Docs. I'm still like a Word person, but
Pick a font that is in Microsoft Word as well.
Got it. And we have a question here from Radhika, and this is, I know, a big debatable question. In the world of journalism where I come from, it's usually frowned upon if you have more than one page of a resume because journalists like to keep things short. But that's not the norm, right? She wants to know, what is the maximum number of pages for a resume?
So again, it depends, but my general rule of thumb is if you have less than 5 years, try to keep it to 1 page. More than that, I really, really try to keep it to 2 pages. I have been known to go to 3 pages, but usually those are people where I'm trying to reference maybe some publications they did or presentations they delivered. A lot of studies have shown that you risk losing sort of those ADD readers if you go longer than 2 pages. Doesn't mean you're going to lose all of them, but you might lose a good bit. And another study I saw, and I do not remember where it was, but even though people think they want a 1-pager, the majority of people hired turned out to have 2-page resumes.
That's really interesting. I think
try to stick to 2, my aim.
And I think the 2-page takes a lot of stress off of people who say, what am I going to cut or something like that. So I think that's a great answer. And then the other thing that I saw people asking was, when it comes to the resume, how do you sort of decide what to actually mention? So we have a question from Ethan who says, for a younger candidate, should you put maybe non-industry experience? Maybe you're moving into the finance industry a few years out of college, but you had to work retail or something before then. Should you put those on your resume, or should you only stick to industry-specific jobs?
So I just finished writing the resume of a friend's son who just graduated from college. So I always go back to reflect on each role, whether you were in retail, food service, or an internship that or a volunteer work that aligns with what you want to get into when you are able to get in the real world. And think about what you were proud of. What skills did you learn? Oftentimes, that answer to that question is industry transferable. So in retail, you learn sales and service. You learn relationship management. You learn time management. Certain roles, you learn budgeting. So think about those skills and think about the skills that are required for the roles that you're targeting and see what you can come up with that is industry transferable. And definitely include this stuff.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've seen in some of the data that LinkedIn has put out from the sort of recession and the pandemic is that people are switching from industry to industry. And one of the things I've noticed in the data was that people who work in restaurants or maybe are bartenders, they're pivoting into human resources and they're able to parlay those people skills into that. So is that what you're talking about, is sort of saying like, hey, this is not relevant to human resources, but I can work with people?
That's what, and they're also moving into account management roles because they're just really, really good at conflict resolution and, putting out fires. And those are skills that are really valuable there.
Yeah. And we have a question here, and I know you work with a lot of clients, and I assume part of your job is also acting as almost like a therapist in a way when they're telling you about their job search. But for Andrea, she wants to know what to do about job search fatigue. What are your personal tips when you've been looking for a job for a while?
It's hard, no doubt. Whether you're employed or unemployed, it's stressful, and all of this going on with everyone having to wear lots of hats at home, it makes it even harder. First thing I would say is recognize that it's hard, recognize that it's okay to have bad days, and acknowledge it, and try to build some time into your schedule to do some things that, make you smile. Secondly, and I think this is super important, is have people around you that can support you in job search. Sometimes friends and family mean well, but they haven't been through job search. They don't know what's going on. Go to Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups. There are job search support organizations throughout the country, and see if you can't find 5 people to go through this, so that you're not alone, because they'll pick you up when you're down, and you can do vice versa.
Yeah. And I think also reaching out to other job seekers is a great way to know that you're not alone and that, you're sharing a similar struggle. So I think creating that support network is vitally important.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason that job searches get really stressful and worrisome is the rejection that is just sort of ubiquitous in a job search. Either you don't hear back, or you hear back and it's a no until you get a yes. So we have a question here from Drita, who says, how can you get a company you apply to respond to you? I think a lot of people struggle with that, where they maybe submit an application, they don't hear back, or even maybe they hear back and then all of a sudden they get ghosted.
Yeah. It seems, ghosting was always the thing, and I fear it might be on the rise with COVID. As hard as it is, the first piece of advice I have is try not to take it personally. Just like all of us, people in HR, decision makers, recruiters, they have a lot going on. They're trying to juggle lots of other things. So, give them some grace that way. In terms of how to follow up, though, you want to strike a fine line between feeling like a stalker and super needy and desperate, and someone who's really interested in the opportunity. So what I recommend is following up every, 5-7 days. I used to say every 3 to 5, but given what's going on right now, stretch that out a little bit to every 5 to 7 days. And in your communications, thank you again for the opportunity. I understand that things are a little wonky right now, and so next steps might be a little bit more challenging. And by saying that, you're acknowledging their pain. You can follow up then by saying, if there's anything else that you might need from me to help you make your decision, please let me know. And then always close out by letting them know how interested you are in the opportunity. And try that 3 times. And after 3 times, it's probably not going to happen, but worth a shot.
And I think, like when you said sort of show appreciation and grace, I think that's so important, even when it's really difficult, because the example I always use is that when I was in conversations with LinkedIn to work here, I didn't hear back for a while. And next thing I know, I got an email back eventually, and they said, hey, sorry, we got busy and we just had to sort of do other things for a little while. Do you still want to chat about coming on board here? And so even though that I had that like delay there, I left the door open and I just said sort of, hey, thanks for the opportunity. And they did follow up. So the door is never closed until it's finally closed.
And people do appreciate reminders and follow up, as long as they're not too much. And I feel like that every 5 to 7 days is sort of a good rule of thumb for that.
Yeah. I think that's a really great advice. And as someone who is a journalist and also an anxious person, my temptation is every hour on the hour, but I try and defeat that. Yeah. Exactly. And we have a related question here from Andrea, which is, how do you find who to connect with at a company? So maybe you submitted your application, maybe you want to follow up and learn more about a position. How do you actually find out who to contact, and how do you actually get in touch with them? What do you recommend?
Well, that is the beauty of LinkedIn. It's the world's greatest CRM platform in my mind. Use the filters in LinkedIn to search, and you can search by company, you can search by roles, and those names will pop up. And what I love is you can search by first degree connection, second and third, and you can see if you know someone that knows someone. But to me, that is the best site to use to figure out who is going to be in the room.
Yeah. And a follow-up question that I have always is, when you're doing a cover letter in addition to a resume, do you suggest doing a cover letter? And then also, should you address it to the hiring manager, the recruiter? What are your thoughts on that?
So if you have a relationship with the person and they're asking for you to send them your resume, then definitely address them in the cover letter. If you don't know who it's going to be, you can say dear hiring manager, because that sort of, or dear decision maker, and that sort of covers all of your bases. In terms of whether to use a cover letter or not, if the posting calls for one, you better have one. Otherwise, there's sort of no downside. From everything I've observed, the truth is they probably only get read maybe a third of the time. There's a lot of people that just don't have time for that. But those that do take the time to read them, when they are powerfully written, they can really make a big difference. So worse, it'll get thrown out. Best, it might make a huge impact. So it's worthwhile.
Yeah. And I think, especially if you're applying to a large company, in my experience, there's like a committee of people who read it. So just saying sort of hello, like you said, decision maker, or sort of that ambiguous sort of term is likely a good idea, because I might be reading it even though I'm not the hiring manager. So I think that's great advice. And then we have a question here from Jeff, and this also sort of goes along that idea. If a resume makes it through an ATS, does it then actually get read by a human? So I guess, if you do win the lottery and get through the ATS, what happens then?
So presumably it does. What happens though is that this is sort of the whole hidden job market theory that I know you discussed in other LinkedIn lives. A lot of times when the posting has come out, they have already sort of amassed a talent. There's already a pipeline of people in there. So that's why it's so beneficial to try and bypass applying online, find out about opportunities before the postings come out. So that you have someone that's already looking for you. So presumably if they don't have a huge group of talent ready to go, and then they posted it, then it will get read. But if it was a role that they posted because they needed to, in order to sort of satisfy, regulatory, EEOC compliance, or if they posted it with the intention of hiring someone internally, my understanding is it doesn't always get read, but it depends on the company, depends on the size. There's just a lot of factors.
Yeah, and I think and it comes down, I think, to the recruiter too. I know last year I went to a recruiter conference to just basically talk to them and see how they work. And what I was struck by was a lot of them said, "Listen, I do go through all the resumes, even though we have an ATS. The only thing is that when you have maybe 1,200 resumes for one job, they're basically doing what the ATS is. So they're looking through the resumes saying, okay, do they mention this? Do they mention that? So even if they are doing that, they're basically getting to a point where they're basically replicating the ATS. So
it's a scan. It's a quick scan.
Yeah. And I saw in the comments, and this is something that I always like to touch on because unfortunately it is very prevalent and it's a big concern among job seekers. Kim mentioned ageism. And I think there's a lot of different approaches with resumes on how to deal with ageism. And how do you suggest maybe an older candidate, so maybe they've been in the workforce 20, 30 years, how should they craft their resume to combat ageism, or at least not make that less of a worry for them?
Mm-hmm. So my goal with the resume is to make someone timeless. I've always said it doesn't matter if the reader doesn't need to know if you're 35 or 85. The way that I accomplish that is that I will focus primarily, you've heard it before, on the last 15-ish or so years. What I will do with earlier experience, if it is relevant or adds value to the story in terms of what you're targeting, I'll include it under an earlier experience section. I will remove the dates from it. What that does is it not only, it helps to make you timeless, it eliminates what I refer to as the rabbit hole phenomenon, which is what all of us do, whether we're just without any intention of being discriminatory. We start reading early, dates from 2001 and then the 90s, and we'll go, to school. I wonder if they have kids. We go off on tangents. And when you just have 6-8 seconds to make an impression, I don't want my readers in that rabbit hole doing that. Now, it's interesting though, LinkedIn is different. LinkedIn, the rabbit hole phenomenon doesn't happen. You have to keep on clicking if you're interested in earlier roles. And so if there is a job that was completely pertinent to what they're targeting and adds huge value and it happened in 1996, I'm going to include it. The other thing to keep in mind with ageism is that, ageism is all isms are about biases. So I always try to keep in mind, what are the biases against ageism? And a lot of it is they think that you know more than anyone in the room, or they think that you are set in your ways, or maybe not up to speed on technology. So whatever you can do with the language you choose and the skills that you're highlighting to mitigate that, the better. Show that you've taken courses, show that you know some cool software if the role calls for it. Show that you're always, you're continuing to learn. Those sorts of things help to dispel the biases against ageism.
Yeah. And I think, and I'm interested this is something that I've heard from a person, and I thought it was a good explanation, and tell me what you think about it, is basically that if a person has, 20, 30, 40 years of experience, a lot of times the natural reaction is, I've had all this experience and you should give me that job. But the way you should actually go into it is thinking is, I've had all this experience and I've acquired these skills, and this is how I could use them for you. Where you have to sort of say, this is why all of that is valuable, and I could use it to help you and your company.
I love that. And that's why you need to pick and choose through your earlier career to think through what parts of my earlier career add value to the story and how will they help others. So
got it. Yeah. When I heard that, I was like, okay, that's a really good frame shift in your mind to sort of think of that. And we have a question here from Miriam. Does it make sense if we modify our resume according to the job description for each job posting? I assume I'm going to know your answer on this, but also I was wondering if you could add, should people be doing that? And if so, how should they tweak it for each position?
Yeah. Yes, you should. And what I do when I'm writing is I try to, I have certain sections of the resume that are easily adaptable. So I mentioned earlier that I always make sure to have a headline. The headline is your job title. So that way, if you're targeting an astronaut role, you say you're an astronaut. A chef, you put chef. That headline can easily be tweaked and customized based on the role that you're targeting. If you want to position yourself as an industry specialist and the role you're targeting is in that industry, put that industry along with the title. If you want to be industry agnostic because you're trying to make a switch, remove the industry from it. So that's a great place to make a change. The skill section I alluded to earlier, that is a great place where you can customize based on the skills that are necessary, that are critical for that role. And again, like with LinkedIn, a lot of the postings have those skills right there. With the achievements, I always want to lead off. My first bullet is always the thing that I am proudest of as it relates to the role that you're targeting. So you might want to evaluate the bullets that you have included and maybe move one up to the top based on what you're targeting. So those are sort of 3 easy fixes that allow you to customize accordingly.
Yeah. And we have a question here from Jaden, and you mentioned sort of making a transition and what to do with that on your resume. But for someone who is changing careers and, maybe they are saying, okay, I want to go into finance, but all my life I've worked in retail. How do they make that pitch in their resume? Do you have any suggestions for people in that position?
Yeah. First and foremost, you need to know that applying online is going to be much harder for you because with ATS, the person with the most keywords often wins. And just by not having been in that industry, you're not going to have the number of keywords. That being said, when you get in front of people are always willing to take risks where ATS isn't. But what you do in terms of framing your story for that new role is you need to think through what are not the technical skills that are related to that specific industry, but think about the skills that are needed in both industries that are transferable, and think about what problems you have solved in your industry that are common problems to another. When I write bullets, I think about what was I proud of, and I work through what was the result. Oftentimes, the resolutions to each problem is commonplace. It doesn't really matter what the industry is. All industries care about growing revenues. All industries care about keeping their numbers and making sure their numbers are accurate. There's common pain points and common problems. So focus your bullets on those transferable problems and issues.
Yeah,
Does that
I think
answer
that's yeah, and I think that's fantastic advice because I think when you do that and you obviously have to research the company and you have to research the industry, it shows that you did put in the research when
Right.
the resume is tailored. Because it's not just like, here's this resume that I made a month ago for another employer. Hope it works for you. It's showing that
Right.
you put in the legwork to actually learn. So I think that's
Right.
fantastic.
The good thing about that legwork is it also sort of tells you what is some lingo that's maybe used in that industry that's different than yours, because you want to strip away lingo that is just part and parcel with yours, with the industry that you're in.
Yeah, no, and I know that especially in like legal firms
Legal,
and things like
government,
that.
military, all the acronyms.
I know. As a journalist, I've spent most of my life just asking, "I'm sorry, what does that acronym mean?"
Yeah,
So
what does that mean? Yeah.
yeah, and I think another thing I want to get to before we go is this is from Patrick. What tips do you have about drafting a cover letter? What should be included and how brief is too brief?
It should never be longer than a page. I try to aim for 3/4 to a full page. What needs to be included is an intro that says what kinds of problems do you solve. Then what I often suggest is including some highlights that show this is an example of how I solve these problems. So maybe have 3 examples or highlights, and then always have a closing that says, these are my skills and this is what makes me a perfect fit for the role. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And then as a closing question, we have a question here from Pete. And this is, I think, a good catch-all for everyone, which is, what are the biggest mistakes people put in their resumes thinking it's a good idea?
The biggest thing I see is that it's hard to be objective with your own blood, sweat, and tears. And so people tend to put everything in the kitchen sink in there. Every single job they have, every responsibility they had. I've always said, this is not your blueprint. This is your brochure. So you need to pick and choose the accomplishments, the roles, all of it based on whatever you're targeting. So it's okay if there's a role that you did, back when that has nothing to do with what you want to do next. Leave it out. If you landed a job for 6 months and it didn't work out, take it out. If there's no value, don't put it in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice because as someone who spent, many years editing other people, I've become very blunt when I say no one cares at a certain point.
When you put too much, your eyes glaze over. People are reading these on mobile, big screen. They're in a rush. They're competing with other things to read. So you got to have the stuff pop off the page.
Yeah, and I think like the idea is like if you have something that you've written and it's in your resume and you were the hiring manager for that company, will they care that you've done this in your past? And will they care that that's in your background? So hopefully, that guides some people into editing what they should.
Just see if you do the job that was really tough or you were really proud of it. It's hard.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Virginia. And I hope everyone follows your profile. We've been flashing the link at the bottom of the screen. So hopefully people will click on it and give you a follow because you're always posting great stuff.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all of you out there who are joining us. I hope you've been watching the comments because our producers and Juliet, who surfaces all your wonderful comments to me during the show, has posted the link for next week's show. We have Madeline Mann coming on talking about careers, job searching. So give that an RSVP and you'll get a notification when we go live on September 18th at noon Eastern time. And then don't forget to check back on the LinkedIn news page, which is where we're broadcasting right now, every day at noon, because my colleagues host a show called Business Unusual. And on Monday, they're going to be talking about the luxury fashion industry. So, you know, fashion, we live our lives in it. And it's very important to make sure that is sustaining through the pandemic. So be sure to give that a watch and listen. It affects everyone. And I hope, as always, you join us next time. I have my newsletter that comes out on Monday, so you're welcome to subscribe to that too. And until next time, I hope you're safe and well. As I always say, make sure you're following the advice of your local officials and your local health organizations, because the only way you can get hired and be a good candidate is if you're healthy enough to do so. And I hope you found support through this show. You know, the wind is at your back. We are all rooting for you. And that's a very true and sincere statement. So, you know, make sure that you join us next time. And until then, be well and be safe.